That's what.
I always forget. I don't wear my makeup.
Very good.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:35. I'd like to ask everybody to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the Religious Display Committee meeting. I'll open the floor for public comments.
Could I say something first? Is it legal?
Not during public comment.
But it pertains to public comments. Well, can I?
No, I'm going to say no. All right, so does anybody have any public comments? Yes.
Yep. My name is Keith Snyder. I live on Main Street. I timed myself reading this and come to about 6 minutes, so thank you in advance for allowing me that kind of time. The pro-crash side of this seems to honestly believe that people who think differently than they do are mean and petty. I haven't been sure exactly how to respond to this, so last week I didn't. But something Paula Antolini said last week made me realize what I did have to offer. Paula said that when she first moved here, one of the first things she noticed was that very crash in that very square. She said she was struck by how beautiful it was, that it wasn't religious, that there was no problem with it, and that opinions to the contrary are because of hatred. I would like to share my early experience moving here. It was August 2014. I had just separated from my wife 2 weeks earlier, and my 2 boys and I landed here. And we really liked it. We still do. We liked our street. We liked our neighbors. We liked the grocery store, which had a sushi bar. We liked the bookshops and the bike shop, and we felt like we had landed someplace safe. 4 months later, in December, I came around the corner and saw a big crash on what seemed to be a central public square. And I stopped and just stood there with my mouth open. I know that sounds like the kind of thing you say when you're exaggerating, but it's not. I literally stood there with my mouth literally open. And suddenly my new safe little town was a little less safe. To understand why, you have to understand something that may not be within your experience. I grew up with swastikas spray painted on my house and crosses burned into my lawn. Regularly, for years. And regularly, for years, the local good Christians turned their eyes away and pulled their shades down. It wasn't their business. They didn't want to get involved. The only person who ever helped us scrub the swastikas off, as far as I can remember, was the German lady across the street, Hunter. But those weren't really good Christians. Here's something else I saw not long after I moved here. There was a swastika at the Bethel train station on the sign that says Bethel. Not big. It was, I don't know, about that big. It hung around there for a long time, and none of my neighbors scrubbed it off, which I understand. It was just a little graffiti. Probably kids. I finally scrubbed it off myself as best I could with a toothbrush because it wasn't important to my neighbors. But tonight, something is really important to my neighbors. A little statue of Jesus. That's important. And which patch of land it goes on? And keeping other people's things off that land at the same time. Which is odd because Jesus never said he wanted a little statue of himself. What he does care about, and he makes this very clear, is how you treat neighbors and strangers. That's what he says, flat out, that he cares about. Had you behaved as though you loved your neighbor and cared for strangers, none of this would be happening. But you didn't. You want your statues in a town space between certain dates by themselves. That's what's important to you. And by letting you do it, the town says that's what's important to the town. Okay, I want an atheist side, and I'm willing to share. I'm hoping to share. I don't mind that other things are up at the same time. I hope they are. It's great. It's sharing with You'll allow everybody else to split the leftovers. That's not respect. Everybody knows that's not respect. You know that's not respect. That's winning. To me, sharing is the win. There are two things I've heard pro-crash people say to justify their positions. One is, I've lived here a long time, so my opinion counts for more. Well, I've lived here a long time too. I've lived my entire life in the United States of America, which is where we are right now. It's not the United States of one group gets to choose first, and that everybody else divvies up what's left. You're entitled to zero special treatment of your display, and I'm entitled to zero special treatment of mine. And this is true whether one of us has enjoyed special treatment in the past or not. The second thing I've heard pro-crash people say is there are more of us, so what we want should matter more. That's not what Jesus taught. That's not what anyone who cares about right and wrong has ever taught. You're wrong about this in the moral code of your own religion. So all of that is what hit me when I came around that corner and saw your crash for the first time. All by itself, in what I was pretty sure was a public space. I saw that my new town doesn't care. You, I expect not to care. But this was the town putting its stamp of approval on it. Boom, we don't care either. Okay, I'm a big boy. I've been through much worse than that. But now that this is all happening, maybe when there's a meeting, I'll show up and say what I think. You can disagree with me. That's one of the beautiful things about living here. We can disagree. But maybe next time somebody tells you it's hate, or you hear that coming out of your own mouth, maybe you can take a second and rethink that a little. Last thing I have to say, we all have biases, and I have one too, and I'm gonna own mine. I'm sitting here expecting you to do the least neighborly thing, because in my lifelong experience, that's just what my good neighbors do. So, I have kids to pick up at Quasi and a couple of deadlines to meet, so I'm out of here unless someone wants to say something, and thank you for the 6 minutes.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Am I the only one? This really concerns Bethel, I can see. You know, when my father 50 years ago
Oh,
used to.
sir, if you're gonna make a public.
Oh, I'm sorry,
comment.
John. Hamlin, Five Elgin, born and raised in Bethel. Anybody here born and raised in Bethel? Can I ask that? One? Okay. Anyway, I can remember when a cross used to be on our symbol up there, but then they took down the cross from the symbol, because that was offensive. The Supreme Court has already ruled on this. If it's a tradition, there are no arguments. It's always been a tradition. This town, I think your name is Mr. Martin, heard you on LAD today, that's the only reason I'm here.
I wasn't me, I don't think.
You just mimicked everything I've been saying about this. I worked for the government for 33 years, and it's ridiculous that this town, the house of God, if you say it in Hebrew and you say Bethel, is, it was formed by an ecclesiastic society that couldn't go 5 extra miles to Danbury, and back then, you know, they're in a wagon. So, a lot of people from New York moved up here in the last 50 years, and they don't like the way things are run up here. This has always been a tradition, just like the statue they had, I believe, in Maryland. They just decided on that, that was a tradition. So people can sue until the cows come home, and they will, and you'll appeal, and they'll appeal, and hopefully this doesn't go to the Supreme Court like the Danbury Hat Factory did many years ago, but I don't think there's any argument here that it is a tradition. You're never gonna make everybody happy. I was very unhappy with the Supreme Court decision today, but that's life. We live in a republic, and we elect people democratically. So if people don't like decisions, they can always change who's represented. But thank you for listening.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right then. So we'll move on to our next order of business, which is correspondence. Dion, we have no correspondence, okay. Moving on, the next, I'd like, let's consider the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting last week, Thursday, June 20th. Have you all had an opportunity to review the minutes that
Yeah.
Dion sent us? All right, do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
to approve the minutes from the last meeting. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes, minutes are approved. The next order of business, we have three things. I wanted to point out, you all have in your handouts this really great flow chart that one of our board members, the committee members, Danielle, provided to me, and I thought it was great. And so I asked that it be included in, and I think it will really help guide us and keep us on track. So if we follow the flow chart, I'm gonna start at the top. I think,
Holly,
yes,
can I just say, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna interrupt, but I just want, when you read the agenda, I did copy off of Danielle, so I just don't, there's no plagiarism, I want to give her reference. But I did, since she had sent it and I was building the agenda, I just built it
Yeah.
off of that, because we had.
I appreciate that
So-
because, and I appreciated, as I said, I sent Danielle a private message thanking her because it really does help us, you know, focus on what the real issues are tonight and keep us in line. So, that being said, the first, I think you're absolutely right, Danielle, the first order of business is we need to decide as a group whether or not the town of Bethel will allow any religious displays on P.T. Barnum Square and the other two identified town, we call them triangles here in the thing. So, does anybody wanna should we have some discussion about this before we move to vote? Or do you feel like we've discussed enough? So I'm leaving it open to you.
This was actually the first thing we talked about during our
Right.
first meeting.
Right,
And, you know, and when we went through that list of details
Right.
that Mr. Knickerbocker had given us. And I remember that I think it was, what's his name, Tony. Tony had said, if we vote no, then we could just leave right now.
right.
And then I think someone said, no, you can't do that. So, but here we are back to the same question.
Right,
That we
after,
talked- yeah.
yeah,
After all this other discussion.
Right.
Does
Okay.
anybody object to voting on this question? Does anybody have any further comment or discussion
we should
prior
vote.
to being able to vote on the
Yeah, I
first
think we
question?
should vote by now.
I think if no one has anything more, I mean, I'm open to, if there's anything new, that has come to anybody's attention, whether through the public comments over the last few times, or just in your own research and thinking about, I'm open to talking a little bit more before we vote, so, but that means somebody has to say something.
My personal feeling
Yes.
is, and I can only speak for me, is that I think we've done a great job, for the most part, of having a respectful dialogue on all of these things, and I think we hashed everything through, and I think we needed to. And
Yep.
I don't have anything left that I haven't offered, and I hope that I have listened attentively to what everybody else has to say, so I'm good.
So we're ready to vote.
Well,
That's
that's
me.
Danielle.
I
Why don't we
speak
just
for
go down the
everybody.
line? Diana, are you ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay. And then, you know, hold on.
This is when we own it.
Aaron,
Yes.
are you ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay. Mary, are you ready to vote?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Fran?
Yes.
Yes.
Robin? Okay. So, I'm going to ask the question. Shall the town of Bethel, now remember, we're not deciding anything in this committee, whether it's all decided tonight or we do part of it tonight. We're voting to put together a recommendation to the first selectman, and the onus will be on them on whether or not they adopt our recommendation, ignore it, adopt it in part.
Yeah, we
or-
don't know.
well, we have no idea, okay? So for the purposes of our recommendation, shall the town of Bethel allow religious displays on P.T. Barnum Square and the two other identified triangles, for lack of a better word?
The question is kind of skewed, because it looks like it's just religious. And the question should really be, you know, religious and other.
If you look at it, Fran, they're broken apart. Both of those things are addressed.
All right, then we'll do it that way.
I would just like
It
to,
just can't be one question, though.
in response to your comment, Fran, I just would like to say, this is the Religious Display Committee.
Right.
And this committee was formed based on the contention during the holidays around holiday displays. And that's really, I think, the only purpose of
Right.
our committee is to make a recommendation about religious displays.
Okay.
I think we heard from Beth, who's from zoning and, I think she's from
Planning and zoning.
planning and zoning. And she, they have their own regulations, I think, that would cover the
Planning
rest of the
commission.
year. Yeah,
Holly, can I just clarify something
Yes.
that was brought to my attention?
yes.
Since this is my wording, I just wanna make sure that my wording is clear and
Okay.
what my intention was, since things aren't always. But I had broken out those two questions for a very specific reason, because I think there's a difference between putting candy canes on the square or holiday lights or whatever. So then there is putting religious displays out there. So when I said non-religious, that's what I was referencing, as
Okay.
opposed to, as we've already decided, atheist displays are not considered non-religious, they are considered a belief system.
Right.
So, just to clarify in case that was unclear.
Okay, so everybody gets that we're just talking about actual religious displays. All right? So if we're ready to vote, should the town of Bethel allow religious displays on P.T. Barnum Square and any other property that's available and approved by the town or Park and Rec? All in favor?
Well, we
Okay,
got
somebody needs
multiple
to second
choices.
it. Someone needs to second
I'll
it.
second it.
it.
Okay,
Right,
Tim,
you can.
I'll second it.
What do you mean multiple choices?
Do you wanna go down the line and have everybody vote for one of the three choices or to abstain? Either their vote is gonna be no, yes to PT only, or yes to all three, or
You know,
you can
somebody has
abstain. No, you don't have to vote. You can choose to.
Okay, then that's three different motions. It needs
Yeah.
to be,
Okay.
One
the
at
way
a
that it
time.
was stated,
Yeah.
it
You can do
was
one.
one motion.
Right, so,
Maybe we should break out whether we're talking about just one spot first, what do you think about that? Versus three, that's an easy break, and then what are we gonna, if it's all three, then what are we putting on those three, or if it's just one, what are we putting on that one? Does that make sense?
it does make sense. But now,
Procedurally.
here I thought,
Just procedurally.
yes, procedurally, here I thought it was a simple flow chart.
Just go with religious displays
So,
on anyone
In
or all.
in my mind, I had thought the first question would be, would we allow religious displays at all on
Any-
any
on
town
anything.
property?
Why don't
That's
we
another
start
way to
there
do it,
and then
that's
we'll
fine.
go from there,
Yeah,
depending on the outcome.
So that's my question, and I heard a second from somebody.
I
And
did.
second.
Okay, so, all in favor of allowing religious displays on town property?
Right.
Who's taking the count?
So, it's
So-
yeses, kind of no, or. Okay, go.
Okay, so, having answered yes,
What was the count?
It was 6-2.
Thank you.
we move down on the flow chart to whether or not the town of Bethel allows.
Actually, I'm sorry, you have to ask
I'm
for the
sorry.
no votes, just so that
I'm
I can
sorry.
record it.
You're doing great.
I'm not trying to be a stickler.
No, I appreciate the help, okay? And maybe if I join another committee, if I'm so, lucky to
You're
be
doing
asked to join
amazing.
another committee, I'll have a lot more experience. So you took the yes count, any no's? We have
Okay.
2, and any abstentions?
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for correcting my procedure. Okay, so the answer to the question is yes, we should allow it. Now, I'd like to pose a second question. Having answered yes, should the town of Bethel allow religious displays on P.T. Barnum Square only, as opposed to all the available town properties?
I think may I clarify before we move on? So this
Yes.
is yes, all three. Yes, all three, and we talked about there being potentially if there were additional spots. I know that was left open-ended before, but so I'm taking this as PT only or whatever the
All
town makes
three.
available.
Okay.
As of right now,
Right.
we have 3, but
Right,
should
or
the town
whatever.
make any additional spots available? Matt had mentioned in passing the place on Shelter Rock where the Welcome to Bethel sign is. So I'm looking at it as yes, PT Barnum, or yes, whatever the town makes available. Does anybody object to that
That's
understanding
good,
of
because
it?
you could be, think about like something smaller going someplace else.
I don't want to be restrictive to say just those 3 and never any other one, should other ones become available.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
PT only or whatever the town makes available is my understanding.
about
Agreed.
PT et al.?
I think
I
that's,
second
I
the
think,
motion.
I think that's an excellent edit and amendment, so,
Okay. I just need somebody to state the motion.
so I'm gonna state the motion. Shall the town of Bethel allow religious displays on P.T. Barnum Square and any other available land?
I will second the motion.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask, all in favor of allowing the religious displays on P.T. Barnum and/or any available other pieces of town property?
Okay. Yea
All
or-
in
yea
favor?
or nay?
Good.
I just don't know what the difference is between your first motion and your second motion.
So the question is P.T. Barnum only.
Okay, but you said P.T. Barnum or other appointed, other approved areas. That's what you said.
That's
with
pretty
your
much,
first-
it actually pretty much the
That's what
same.
you said,
Yeah,
Holly,
actually,
with your
she's actually
first
right.
motion.
Yeah, she's
Now,
pretty
your
good.
second motion, if I stated it correctly, is approval of P.T. Barnum Square and any other available land. I don't know how.
That's different, yeah.
Perhaps opening the floor to a discussion as to whether
Yeah,
anyone.
maybe we should go back. I'm a
wanted-
little too open to, you know what, I'm very pliable because I really, honestly, I know we're a divided committee, but I really have liked how we have, you know, had the exchange, and I just wanna keep it open and fluid, and so I invite everybody's input, but it did create two identical questions, so.
Can I just say, just sitting back, not involved in the discussion, it sounds like you have already approved to have holiday displays on the land that
It's available.
you were told was available.
Yeah.
That's
much it.
already
So
been
now the next
approved.
question is, are we restricting it to
So-
Bethel or to P.T.?
Yeah,
Right.
okay, so.
What's your next step now?
So the next step is, will those displays be, will those displays only be allowed on P.T. Barnum Square? Or shall it be allowed?
Yeah, but don't put the or in,
So
otherwise.
all in
it's-
favor of those,
Right.
restricting it to P.T. only? And then people can vote,
And then we go to number 3.
depending on how they vote. Well,
I should have moved this over to Danielle, so she knew this again. I should have
But then
Would
that's
you like me to
saying
make the
that-
motion?
that,
Yes.
let's say, we can't put a religious display, a small one, anyplace else.
this is for public land only.
It's only
Yeah,
public
I
land.
know, but it would be for the other three, then we're saying we can't put anything anyplace else.
That's right, that's
the
the
understanding,
question,
right?
is whether or not we are restricting it to just PT, whether or not we are recommending to restrict it just to PT Barnum, or whether or not we are recommending that all available public spaces be open to displays. That's correct.
Pretty much the same as the first one, isn't it?
So the first one
No,
was,
the
should
first
you
one-
allow it or not allow it?
Oh, okay, okay,
So now that
Now,
we've
should
agreed
it
to
be
allow it,
restricted
we're going to
to,
restrict it.
okay.
okay, so
So-
go ahead, bring the motion.
Sure. So I make a motion to vote whether to restrict to P.T. Barnum Square only.
I second it.
All in favor of restricting it to P.T. Barnum Square only? All opposed to restricting it to P.T. Barnum Square only? Any abstentions? Looks like all noes. I have 8 noes.
We could put it anywhere. All right.
So now I think you have discussion.
Yep. So, since our recommendation, this committee's recommendation will be that religious displays be allowed on the available town property that's been identified by the town as available for religious displays. We now have the question, and this, I think, we need to have discussion before we have any voting. So, the first little bubble here on our flow chart asks, how many displays will be permitted at a time? Well, that's really, number one, my comment about that is, it's gonna depend, P.T. Barnum Square versus the little triangle versus, I mean, and the size of
And the
this-
size of the
various
things,
displays. So it's hard to, in my mind, put a number on how many displays will be allowed.
How about a maximum?
And how do you do a maximum, because what if you say a maximum is 5 and then there's 5 big,
It's a different question.
you know? Yeah.
I think we can all agree there is some maximum. Nobody's gonna vote for 100, right?
Well, I mean, for PT Barnum Square, 5 might be working, but for that Libby Square or Libby Triangle, 5 wouldn't work. So I think,
Question should be parsed out to each location.
I think so. Well, do we want to do that? Because we don't know we have to assume that this is going to be a policy that the first selectmen are going to adopt. And so, or reject and put their own policy in place. And that being said, Aaron, there might become other areas that haven't been identified, not just in the coming years, but even by this holiday season, having gone through this and questioned and asked the town, asked the first selectman, asked the Park and Rec department, aren't there other places where we could do this? There might be more places for the selectmen to, put public displays or allow public displays. So I'm not sure that we can make a recommendation about how many on each parcel would be allowed. Yes, Danielle?
Okay, so rather than thinking of it in terms of numbers, now that I'm thinking about it, I imagine that we can all visualize what the square might look like with multiple displays on it. So rather than thinking of numbers, perhaps we need to think of setbacks from each other, how much space should be between, and perhaps we can also think about the percentage of space on the individual piece of property. So 20% of that, I'm pulling it.
We
right
can't
now.
do that with that size.
Fran, please let me finish. So if the size of it is, if we agree that 80% of it should be open for people to walk around, and 20%, I'm again pulling
no, I understand.
numbers,
Right.
and
We
how much
understand.
room
I
there
think
must
it's
be
reasonable.
between displays, that's one different way to look at it. The other thing that I wanna add into that is, when we're talking about not necessarily PT Barnum Square, but the other smaller locations and any other smaller locations that get released, I see problems with only allowing one display on those pieces of property, again, with the same issues that we were talking about before in terms of perceived favoritism, or, so that's something to think about.
So presuming 2 fit, or restricting the size to allow for at least 2, or something more than 1.
That would
And
be
I
my
get what you're
thought,
saying, unless it's, depending on the size of it, depending on,
throwing
think
it on
that's
the table
reasonable.
for consideration.
Can I-
Did you have some, oh wait, hold on, Robin's raising her hand.
Tagging on to what Danielle was saying
Yes.
is, you could have an if and, or an if or recommendation. If, no more than 3 on any location, if the location exceeds, I don't know, 120 square feet, I don't know.
That's
'Cause
why I thought in terms
obviously-
of percentages might be easier,
Yeah.
since we don't, I mean, I'm not ready to gauge what the
Me
square footage
neither,
on any of these
exactly,
properties are.
but then that way, cause like you said, on a smaller piece of property,
Right.
you probably couldn't put a whole bunch of things up.
I honestly don't really
But-
see how you're gonna put anything on 2 of those pieces of property, but
other than a
that's
small
not
sign,
my-
I agree.
But
I would say
to limit
that
it
for the-
to an X number of displays as opposed to, the size and, I'm sorry, not the size, but forget it.
A number.
I can't articulate myself right now.
I think I understand what you're saying though, Robin. I think that, and you make a good point, that if we, we look at each parcel size-wise, we don't need to know the exact square footage, but we look at with like a large parcel like Barnum Square as compared to Libby Square or Libby Triangle, or Libby Island, where that's smaller, you say, okay, only 1 for Libby, only 3 for PT Barnum Square. I get what you're saying.
Or if other future spaces are of a larger size,
Mm-hmm.
then again, that goes back to the square footage of the plot.
I think there's 2 parts of this, right? So it's the safety concerns of whatever, and then there is just clutter. We talked about it looking like a flea market if there's too many. I think for our purposes, we should assume that any recommendation we make, the town is going to make sure
Right.
safety trumps that. So we don't need to, if we make a recommendation that they deem unsafe, they're not gonna follow it.
Right.
So that, and I don't think any of us, I don't have the expertise to determine how high or wide or is for sight
Right.
lines. Let's
Right.
let the town handle that. I think this question is more geared towards, and it almost links to the question immediately below it, which very well linked, is what if it exceeds that number? but it gets too much clutter with the limited amount of space. Having a certain percentage left free might be an idea, because that, you know, certain things are bigger. If you have a bunch of small things that wanna be put, you can do a little bit more. So not saying we're gonna allow 7 displays, well, what if you get 7 really small little signs?
Or 7
Maybe-
gigantic
Or if you get
ones.
Right,
seven
right.
crash size money, absolutely. So a square footage, a percentage of open space is actually something, a very good recommendation to me. I hadn't considered that. I think that, I was thinking in terms of numbers, because you don't know the size of what you're gonna get. And I don't think for us to say, well, we would let 2 big things and 3 mediums and 2 small, that doesn't work either. So in terms of that, saying that we think there should be at least 50%, 60%, 70%, whatever, free space, however that is defined, may leave it as a guideline that the town can then work off of later on. Because I don't think they're gonna be able to make decisions on safety till they see what comes up. I don't think they would let me put the crush in the front corner of the square. It would absolutely block anybody making a left on the Greenwood Avenue. If I put it on the other front corner of it, it's gonna block anybody making a right in front of Famous Pizza. To move it up to the front of the square,
Yeah.
I think will be deemed a safety hazard. The safest place will probably be where it is, or potentially, you could make the argument of the other side of the tree as a second location. Obviously, we know I'm in favor of that, staying exactly where it is. But from a safety perspective, I think that we need to just let the town do their job safety-wise once actual applications come in. So maybe limiting it to that as a suggestion, you know, is a great way to handle it. And just as a guideline, not so much as saying, if we say it's 30%, that the town can't go to 33 if they
We could
decide
also
it.
say between, we recommend between 60 and 75, whatever
We recommend
should
leaving at
be
least
open
X,
space for.
more if available, right, absolutely.
Oh,
Fran?
Yeah,
It's
the
a guideline.
elephant in the room is the creche. Now, we haven't decided that we're gonna move it, and we haven't voted on that. And Tim and I, we talked about, leaving the creche where it is because of safety, because of tradition, because of history. And, you know, we haven't said we're gonna move it. And we're kind of assuming that we're going to move the creche.
We're not
All right.
assuming that.
So
it's
wait,
open.
wait,
I would focus on the
wait,
question.
wait,
We can't-
remember,
when we finish.
okay,
Different question.
We can't really decide how many displays go in P.T. Barnum Square until we decide where we're gonna put the creche.
okay, can I remind everybody, I'd like to remind everybody that, we
We have to
can't,
vote on that.
we can't speak at the same time.
Okay, we have to.
We have
vote on
someone
that.
taking minutes, and in addition, it's just, I can't address everybody.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask if we could go back to, if you'd like to make a comment, just kind of raise your hand, and if I don't turn your way, make a little sound and I'll come, okay? So, but with respect, can I just say, Fran, that comes down to, it is one of the bubbles. We're on how many displays will be permitted at a time, not, you know, how will locations be assigned, or what, you know, all these other bubbles.
So
So
maybe we should just decide this one first, because that will decide
We're not
which,
deciding.
No,
which
we're
one
not.
will be left.
we're just
Decided.
talking right now. Yeah.
All right,
We're just
all right.
talking right now. We're
But
gonna
that's
talk.
the elephant in the
we're,
room.
we're gonna talk about all of
Fresh.
these things.
Okay.
Before we vote on anything, because I don't think it's just one or the other. I think there are a lot of different things that go into. I know for me anyway.
But before we can say what goes where, how many, or what size, or, we have to decide where the creche is going to go, because that will determine everything else.
I think when
We have to decide
well,
that.
we've already,
And we've discussed it, we discussed it
Right,
last
okay.
time, last week, Tim and I, we presented a proposal. I know you didn't wanna comment on it or vote on it, but that's the elephant in the room.
Well, right, as we sit here today, up until this day, the creche has been the biggest display that's been put out for the holidays.
Right.
That doesn't mean that will not be different next year or the year after. There might be a large display that another group would want to build and would want to display on the property. So we can't, I don't feel comfortable limiting the question to where the creche goes.
Okay, I'm just saying that will
Sorry.
that will determine everything else, we really have to discuss that.
Well, I mean, discuss it in terms of size versus in terms of an actual display.
Safety, size, history,
Okay,
So
so,
May.
Completed application.
right, insurance.
Does anybody have any other comments on the section we're on? I think the percentage of open space is a good one. I agree with that. I don't really have anything else to add. Does anybody have any other suggestions on how we could talk about displays, how many displays? You know, again, within the context of clutter, not so much in the context of safety, again, deferring to the town for that.
We won't know
Is there any
until,
other, but just in general, assuming we have, wherever they are, does anybody have any other thing to add before moving on?
No, I don't have anything to
Do-
do.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I saw time frame was over here, so.
Which will be the next one, so we should let Diana go first on that.
Okay, so it's my understanding that a proposal has been offered to the committee recommending that there be a percentage of open space allowed on each available town property for the display of religious displays. So, that being said, does anybody have a suggestion as to what percentage, giving us I like the idea of a range. So that gives the selectmen some idea about, and some movement, should they get more than, and remember, even if we say, you know, we want 20% open space, if there's only one display, I mean, you know, that doesn't matter.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yeah, go
I was
ahead,
gonna
make a
say,
recommendation.
I recommend, instead of getting into specifics, that we just broadly discuss all of them, because I do think that depending on size restrictions, that could dictate percentage that you would need, or depending
Yeah.
on the number, that could dictate.
size and weight and everything.
Or just, I don't know if weight will come into play, but
I kind of.
Well, I think, but
we can put a
can I
range on
just-
it if you want.
Can I just say, Tim, I can appreciate that, but, you know, at some point, I mean, you were talking about leaving it up to the town and the officials that have been figuring this
safety,
out
for
for
safety.
safety. Not just for safety, though, I think they also consider the size and, you know, the placement of things, not just for safety concerns, but maybe even aesthetic. I don't know what goes into their
And also the
decision.
events that go around.
Right, exactly. So, you know, I think leaving it to the town to determine what the appropriate size is for Libby Triangle versus what the
So
appropriate
safety
size is. I think that we don't even need to get into that, because,
Right.
you know, if we say, oh, we're gonna limit it to 5 feet tall, you know, it's not like a 7-foot tall, you know, display is gonna be allowed on Libby.
Right.
They could,
It's a
even
safety
if
on
we
Trump.
said, you know, hey, you could do 7 feet. So I don't think we need to talk about size or physical restrictions, because I think that that's gonna be covered by Park and Rec in the town.
And we don't know how many people are going to apply for.
Okay. Right, exactly. Danielle?
So, getting back to percentages, my
Yes.
feeling on what I think would be aesthetically, nice for our town is, and generally, photography and other things, we go in thirds, right? 1/3, 2/3. So, and I feel like 1/3 for displays and 2/3 for movement, since that space is used by people, and if they're going to be coming to observe the displays, especially on P.T. Barnum. I don't think people are walking around on the
No,
other two
right, right.
areas. But there are trees and there are other things that are on those spaces, other displays that are permanent that are
Right.
there. So my suggestion is 1/3 for displays and 2/3 for traffic and movement and open space.
I think it's actually an excellent idea, just as a broad guideline to the town. I think less
They're gonna
is-
decide however
less
they
is
wanna do it,
always
it's a
more,
suggestion.
right? But depending on what they get as a general guideline,
Hmm.
I don't think
Does
that's a
anybody
trouble.
else have a comment about that? Danielle has recommended that we suggest to the selectmen that they leave about 2/3 open space and you know, relegate 1/3 of the space on the property to the display of the religious displays. Anybody have any other comments about that? Does anybody think that that's too much, too little?
We don't know the number. The only other one I know about is the menorah.
Well,
That's
let's
my
assume,
comment.
let's
My
assume that we have multiples, okay?
We don't know how
Because
many.
we don't know.
5, 10.
If- Right, let's just assume that we have multiples. We don't know the sizes, assume we're all large.
Right.
Okay, making that assumption, what percentage would you be comfortable with recommending to the selectmen, allowing, large displays? We know the crash,
Mhm.
okay, there might be a menorah coming, there might be other things coming.
We don't.
There was a banner, so I
So
don't,
far, we know about 3. I don't know about any others.
so
I don't know
are
if
you
we're gonna expect
comfortable?
an avalanche, you know?
Are you comfortable with reserving 2/3 of the space on P.T. Barnum for open public space and relegating 1/3 to religious displays. However many can fit, however many present themselves to,
Are you asking all of
town.
us, yea or nay?
yes, I'm just I'm asking
For
you
discussion
and
at this
everybody. So, what does anybody think? I mean, I happen to think the 1/3.
I thought it was a fantastic
Well, of
suggestion.
Of course you did, because you gave it.
Yes, yes.
I
What
think
about
it
you?
sounds very reasonable.
Sounds reasonable. Tim already said it sounds reasonable. Diana, Aaron, you're shaking your heads. Robin?
I agree.
Okay, Fran?
I can't really say yes or no, but without knowing the size, the weight. You know, we have a lot of events around the creche, around the Christmas tree, winter festivities, which I think takes place over 3 days.
Are you
No.
suggesting that maybe there needs to be more?
There might be.
More
There-
space
we don't
allowed
really
for-
know- We don't really know how many
No.
people.
No,
have
it's just
applied.
discussion.
We don't really know how many people have applied for, or want to apply for, what should we call it, permit? No?
Can I put a motion on the table?
Go ahead.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
All right. So I move that we make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen that on each individual space, 1/3 is dedicated for displays and 2/3 are left open for, left open. I second that.
Okay, the motion has been made. All in favor to 1/3, a recommendation to the town selectmen that 1/3 of all town property that's available for religious displays be dedicated to the display.
I thought you meant just Barnum Square.
Any property.
Any property.
Any property?
Any property.
Yes,
All in favor?
Aye.
okay.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Me.
Abstain or no?
Yeah,
Oh,
abstain.
Okay,
Until we get more information.
okay. All right, so that's,
The thing is, on the really teeny pieces, we could probably only have one, depending on the size, again.
And that would, again, go
Right.
back onto Parks and Rec,
Oh.
depending on
Right.
what is presented and
Mhm.
what they decide. We can't really make
That's
a
what I've been
recommendation
saying.
to
Yeah.
a specific
So,
size.
Fran, I
We
would
don't-
suggest that as we go through these, we're trying to think of them more as a guideline,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So in
Well, this whole thing
general,
is a guideline.
in general, you know, the question was, do you think 1/3 are reasonable? Had you
Mhm.
thought that it shouldn't be more than 10% or it should be 50%, that would be
Mm-hmm.
different. But I don't think it's gonna be boiled down on any of these bubbles to specific examples.
That's why I'm
It's
saying
theoretical.
I'm abstaining. It's a perfect reason why I'm abstaining. I don't really have any information.
so now, the next bubble is, now do we, since we didn't deal with number of displays permitted, we dealt with square footage or percentage of property.
I think we discussed it.
I think that we leave it up to the town officials to determine how many displays will be
Within the,
within
But that's
the
not what
guidelines.
that bubble says. That
Says if
bubble
it's-
says if you receive more, so rather than in terms of numbers, let's go back to percentages since that's what we're recommending. So if the town were to receive applications for a number of displays that would exceed the percentage that we've allotted, I know that was rather convoluted, was that clear?
if the town were to run out of space.
Thank you, that's a much clearer way of saying it.
Okay.
If the town runs out of space, how will the selection process go for what gets displayed and what doesn't?
Now we're dealing in hypotheticals.
It's all we.
Okay, it's all hypothetical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bubbles. I feel like sometimes you have to, this is my, just discussion at this point, I feel like
Mhm.
sometimes you wait till you have to cross a bridge to figure it out. I don't know that, you know, there are some of the hypotheticals that could get extreme, like, I don't know that we'll get that many, and if we do,
But we don't know, right?
then the town's gonna have to make a decision there. I don't know how to answer that question. Maybe you explore additional locations at that point, you loosen the guidelines on, you know, what spots are available, maybe the town's able to supply more at that time. Obviously, we wanna be as accommodating to as many groups. I just don't know if it's an issue pressing enough. It seems very hypothetical to
It
me
is.
at this point. You would have to get almost triple the number of applications that we've ever had, even thought about. But it could happen. I mean, it definitely is something that could happen. I
One of the-
don't know how to answer the question.
Well, one of the things that was discussed earlier in this committee was first come, first application, first choice, so order of application. Another thing that was discussed was a complete application, having insurance, the permit, and falls within the guidelines. So, as long as, and then you fall to, so first come, first serve, as long as you have a complete, and viable permit and insurance in place. Yes, Mary?
Diana had made a good point though, but if two people show up at the same time for the first come, first
Right.
serve, and they have an insurance binder and they have the complete application, how do you determine it from there?
Yeah.
What about, like, I don't wanna be like too elementary about it, but, like
Elementary is good.
having, a time frame as to when you can apply, and maybe doing like a lottery, instead of like a first come, first serve, maybe pulling numbers out of a hat, so that way it makes it fair for everyone who has a display to bring to the town.
I like that, and I like that, it has to be a completed application, but having had kids in the schools and having been through the process of trying to register them for camps and all these other things, the first come, first serve thing is obnoxious for working
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
or people with other obligations. It's very restrictive, and I have found, it's better now because I do it online, but
I
my
don't
kids are
think
too old for it now.
I don't think
Anyway, I like that.
Can I throw in my 2 cents?
Yes.
What I do like about first come, first serve is because you are offering multiple areas and possibly multiple displays in these multiple areas. First come, first serve, unless you've got everybody unless you've got 15 people showing up with completed applications, insurance binders, all at one time, that I don't believe is going to happen.
Right.
I do see, 2 or 3, maybe 4 coming about like that. But
Mhm.
in theory, we should have enough space.
Right, for
For
2 or 3 or
everybody.
4. And one of the things that I think we have to keep in mind is the fact that I know I would feel uncomfortable making a recommendation that something has to be somewhere, or that anybody could choose. I think that if you have a display, you come, you get a permit, you have insurance, you've drawn it out, so Park and Rec, whoever's making the decision about whether or not it conforms to the safety guidelines, sight lines, as long as all of that happens, then I think you let the town officials, Park and Rec, Yeah. figure out how to configure it. You don't get to say, I want the right corner of PT Barnum Square. I want the back behind the tree. I want this. I mean, because
And that's what Attorney Lawler said, actually.
yeah, I mean,
You did say that.
I think we let because, like you said, the creche doesn't work. You could get your application in number 1, and you could say, I want the right corner of PT. I want right there on the
In
road.
which case, it's not safe.
And then, Park and Rec is gonna be like, we can't do that. And vice versa. Someone might come in with, a small sign and say, I want right in front of the tree. And that just doesn't make sense. So my suggestion to this committee is that we adopt some type of first come, first serve, and lottery. If more come, then a particular space can, and then let the Park and Rec figure it out. That's my recommendation.
What, is there gonna be a time frame for that though, like starting in the beginning of September, or, I'm sorry? It's okay.
No. Finish your thought, Mary, and then I'll get.
Like, is it gonna start January 1st? Is that first come, first served? Does it start,
I know, it's crazy. Danielle.
Holly?
They probably have a date for
There's
Parks and
already a
Recreation.
process
Yeah.
that Park and Rec has
In terms of
established for
accepting the
that.
timing
applications.
for applications and stuff.
I spoke to
So,
somebody
So
yesterday.
what I was trying to say was, these are different questions, what you were speaking to, and they're
Mhm.
different bubbles on the chart. One is, what are you gonna do if you get 25? One is, how are you gonna assign where they go? And I think those do need to be separate questions. I do agree with you wholeheartedly that it will be up to the town government, whether it's Park and Rec or whoever, to
Where they
decide
go.
what's appropriate to put in which location, and that you're not gonna put a flag in a you're not gonna, right, but.
Sorry. I don't want to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But I think those are different things. One, we need to figure out if we have more than the space can hold, what are we going to do about it?
More than all of the spaces together, so more than,
Again, we're anticipating a flood of applications.
Right.
No, we're trying to be ready for a possibility because
flood?
the first selectmen have asked us
I'm-
to make recommendations for a policy, and so we are
I just
trying
don't know how to
make
answer that,
recommendations.
because what if you did get 10, but what if 8 of them were small? You might be able to accommodate that and still be under a third.
Totally,
But you could get 4 or 5 that were monstrous,
right.
and it wouldn't work. So I don't know how we,
So for
it's one of those things where it's like, how do we make a recommendation? It's almost like the town would have to look at it at that time,
Here's what I'm trying
based on what they get. I don't know how to answer it, like, to put a number.
Right, so if they adopt the 1/3, 2/3 policy, for example, and they also say that the application window is from, I don't know what it is, Deanna's told us that it exists, I'm just gonna pull numbers out of my,
October to whatever.
right, October 1st to October 31st is the application window. Then at that time, they are going to be able, because there'll be completed applications with footprints and all of the rest, they can look at that and they can say, this is the square footage that we have requested, this is the square footage that we have allotted. If one number is bigger than the other number, well, in one way it's great, in the other way it doesn't work, then I think you put things in a lottery.
Or
well,
you
what
would go
about
in with that.
first come, first served?
My personal feeling is I
Yeah.
don't think that that's fair. So I don't personally like that policy.
Yeah, I
Discussion.
I
It's
understand,
discussion, it's
I understand. It has its pros, it has its cons.
And, there
You know.
are hiccups that can happen when you're getting insurance that aren't necessarily the fault of the person who's applying. I mean, there's a million reasons why, from a personal standpoint, I don't like policies like that. That's me.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, I'm
you know,
sorry.
we could say that we could have a period where we're waiting for all the applications or for permits to come in. And then we just, then when there's when we reach the cutoff point, we hand these over to Parks and Recreation, and then they look at how many and how the size, and then they decide.
That's exactly
So
what I
there
just
wouldn't
said.
be, right, so there wouldn't be, well, thank you. And there wouldn't be any first come, first serve, any need of a lottery, because those are the groups that have applied.
Well, no, if you have
No.
more applications than the space can hold, then you need to determine who's not going to display.
I think that's really too hypothetical.
I think everybody agrees that we're trying to be as accommodative as possible, so I would
Yeah.
hope that should that ever happen, which may never, it may, but we can still talk about what if it did. I would hope that the first thing would be that the town would see, since there's clearly an abundance of interest at that point, if they could find additional space to be available, because I wouldn't, even a lottery is ultimately gonna exclude
Right.
somebody that wants to display. So I would hope that my recommendation to the town would be, we've never had this issue, but just thinking in case we ever do, at that time, I would hope the town would try to find additional spots. And spots were thrown around that we probably just don't need right now to go to, but it's not like there is nowhere else.
Okay, but here's
At
the
that
main
point.
question,
And-
who will decide where they go?
That's a
You
separate
said-
question, which we already said, the town would take the guidance, the town would see what's practical, what's safe, what makes sense, but I would hope that before any system, first come, first served, lottery, whatever comes into place, that we try to be accommodative. Should this ever even become an issue?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I could see a malicious number of people who are unhappy to do something for a year or two, maybe, in which case they're gonna have to deal with it, but I think the first thing is to try to try to be accommodative.
Yeah, the
That
Parks
would
and
be my
Recreation
recommendation.
people are great.
I
They
don't know,
are.
if we get to a point where we run out of space in Bethel, I don't know what happens then.
Well, respectfully, Matt did come in and say that, actually on multiple occasions, that these are the only 3 pieces of property that are allowed. And I know you were talking about up near McCower, but that didn't come to anything. So I don't know whether there's other pieces of property, but I do think that it's
these are the three that are approved.
It makes me these are the three that we've got, and we
There
were
could
told
be
this is
others.
all we've got. So
Mhm.
the idea of just magically finding more space if we have an influx, that makes me uncomfortable because I'm just not sure that's gonna happen. That more space will be allocated. But
So then maybe we could, that comes back to just seeing what else the town has available. So maybe they're only making 3 available now, but there could be a list put together, that a B list, if you will, that is not available, but should the A list ever be full, we would consider the space by Shelter Rock where the Welcome Bethel sign is, which is, actually has more space than I thought it when I drove by it. We might consider opening parks, we might consider other places, which at this point, the town doesn't want to do, but should we run out of everything on this initial list, would be up for consideration at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen at that time. You know, they don't have to commit to it, but I think these are the 3 that they would like it to be relegated to. I don't think that that's all encompassing of anything that could ever happen.
Robin?
I think we have to keep in mind, life isn't fair. The word no exists, and it's just a fact.
Yeah.
And I think that the guidelines that we're stating are trying to be inclusive and as fair as can be. But the fact of the matter is, there could be a situation where it can't happen.
Somebody is.
Somebody is going to have to hear no, they're not gonna think it's fair, and that's unfortunately life.
I mean,
but then we have to
Okay,
determine
wait,
who
wait.
gets the no.
Right,
I agree
okay.
with you that
Parks
no
and
is-
So
Recreation.
I would like to throw out there, because one of the things that, let's move, and taking that, Robin, what you said, I was thinking, all right, let's talk about, let's throw some of these things that we've floated through the committee. We've talked about tradition, we've talked about precedent, we've talked about majority, okay? We heard that in public comments, okay?
Talked about safety.
So, we've talked about safety, we've really talked about safety, we've
Well,
over talked
let's
about
not do
safety.
that.
Can I clarify?
And
So-
size, and size.
Did we not say though that we were not experts on safety?
Right,
We said that we
right.
could not make those decisions, right?
Right.
We also
I think
said
we
at
can
the
make
beginning-
general
I would have no,
assumptions
I would
about
have no,
safety.
I think there has to be some qualification to be able to have any voice in stating what is safe and unsafe.
And Diana, I apologize, because I'm not sure if you, when you arrived, we tried to hold the meeting as long as we could. We started about 5 or 7 minutes, and did you get an opportunity to hear the public comment, the gentleman that made a public comment? You did, okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so I didn't know whether or not, so in taking and listening to his comments, you know, he brought up a lot of different things, and over the course of the weeks that we've been together, we've talked about a lot of these things. And so, does it make sense, I'm throwing this out there for the committee to consider, in addition to first come, first serve, does it make sense to all for the selectmen to instill in the policy, consideration to displays that, like, the creche, that have been there year after year after year, okay? Does it make sense for the policy to include the idea about tradition and public events centered around a particular display? Is that something that this committee is open to considering?
Yes. Yes, we should.
Ladies here.
Yes,
Danielle.
jump on it.
So my understanding of what Mr. Lawler gave to us is that those are things that we are not supposed to be taking into consideration.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree. I think the ruling last week, which was after Mr. Waller's specifically took tradition and precedent into place. But again, legal discussion, so I mean, ultimately, I think you're asking, some people want lottery, some people are saying first come, first serve, but what if too many people show up? Some people are saying, is there favoritism given to
Right.
precedent? Or should you have 10 spots and 11 apply, okay, these ones have had previous, and that doesn't just have to be the creche, it could be
Right.
any display that's been up before is not gonna be one of the ones that says not getting a spot, kind of thing, and then of what's left, we're gonna do a lottery to figure out, right, or however that works.
Kind of
It's
like
gonna
more.
come, we're not gonna agree in discussion,
No,
it's
we're
gonna
not.
come down to voting.
But I
on
wanna
different
get a
methods.
sense for, I mean, I have an idea about where everybody is on the committee. I think we all do, okay? But, you know, when you talk about, you know, allowing something because of precedent. I think about my daughter and her dorm room, and so she's in it, she gets it, and if she wants to keep it, she keeps it,
Right.
and if she doesn't,
Yeah.
it becomes vacant and somebody else can
Private
take
though,
it.
that's not
Right,
public.
no, I'm
It's just as a procedure.
I'm just, as a procedure, I bring it up, and I'm bringing it up really as devil's advocate, like throwing it out there. When I try to reason arguments, guys, I try to relate it to my life, like how it fits in my life. It helps me understand and formulate my argument.
Yeah.
If I say it, I'm not trying to impose that example or anything on anybody else.
You
It's
just need to
just,
model.
it helps clarify for me. And since it's clear to me, I then share it and say, does this make it clear to you, my thought? And so whether it does or not, if it doesn't, disregard it. But that's how I look at something that's there should stay, and if it moves, then it becomes open. I don't know whether or not that's right for the holiday display, but I certainly do value that as an option. I do see the importance of precedence, so I put that out there. Yes, Fran?
Okay, I said last week, and I'm gonna say it again, that if we have to move the crash, it's going to cause a lot of people to be very angry and upset. And that was exactly what Justice Alito said in the ruling, that taking down that cross, which was a memorial for World War I veterans, would cause a turmoil in the community. And that's not what the First Amendment was advocating. And it was perfect, because that's exactly what I was saying. If we move it, we're going to get a lot of people who are angry. So that case fit right into,
Yeah.
what we were saying.
I think that the thesis of her comment is about majority versus minority, right?
Not really.
Well, we were saying it will be an outcry, so that means more people would be upset that the crush isn't here than less people.
But that's exactly what the justice said, that if they were to remove the cross, people would be very upset and angry. And that exactly echoed what I had said. And, had nothing to do with the lemon test or anything. It was just that, we take this cross down. And he said that the cross, I read the decision, the cross is not even a religious symbol anymore. And they spoke about Blue Cross and the Red Cross and the different, symbols that use the cross. So it's not even religious anymore, it's secular. But,
Okay.
Fran,
Aaron.
I'd just like to interject. I work in the healthcare sector. Blue Cross, just for reference, was started by a religious organization.
Mhm.
So just
I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
hear you.
The
That-
Blue Cross
they-
organization.
Wait,
was-
They
I
said
can't
that.
hear because everybody's talking over each other. So, Aaron, I didn't hear that.
No, what I was saying is, to Fran's arguments, I work in the healthcare sector. The Blue Cross organization was started by a religious organization. So,
They-
to use that as a point, I don't necessarily consider it irrelevant.
They mentioned that it was religious to begin with.
Robin?
I think going back to that particular situation with the cross in Maryland,
Mhm.
you're talking about a permanent monument,
Right.
not a temporary structure that might be up for 6 weeks.
Right.
With hops.
I agree, so
I
I don't
agree.
really see how the one applies to the other.
I don't see,
Can I say for the record that we talked about it, I am a lawyer and I gave my 2 cents about it, but upon further reflection in what our job is, our role is as a committee, it's not our job to interpret what the laws are, and that's the town attorney's job, and so we'll leave it to him. I don't think that we need to take into consideration what the law is, what the present status of the law is with respect to our recommendation, because if we recommend something that's not lawful, it's not gonna be adopted, and we can't, I think I'm the only attorney on the panel, and it's not fair for me to have more knowledge. I think the whole point of this was average Joe citizens getting together and deciding what's right for the town. So I'd like to take the legal aspects off the table and just talk about procedurally what we need to do. So Diana, I'm good.
So, piggybacking off of what you ended with, I think that the comments have been made about, in the past few meetings, about what the majority would feel and how, from what I'm hearing, the assumption that there would be anger attached to the decision. So I'm just gonna offer a different viewpoint, which is how would just because there's higher numbers doesn't mean the feeling can't be the same of how would the minority feel? How would people who, whether it's fairness, discomfort, whether it's just wanting to create, generally in our community, a more equal playing field, more level playing field. I think numbers don't matter, those are neighborly issues that I know for myself, I very much want to be respectful of.
Danielle.
So I am fine with taking the legal aspect off the table, but I do want to point out that we did already get the opinion of the town lawyer, who gave it to us in black and white here, who said that that's not something that we should be considering because it's not fair to offer precedent, it's not acceptable. He laid it out really, really clearly. So with that in mind, I don't think we vote or offer recommendations on that. I agree with you. However, what I do think that we do need to address is, if he's already told us this is how the town feels about it, that there is no precedent and there is no favoritism, or however you want to look at it, history, whatever, then we should maybe consider offering suggestions like we were doing before. We got off tangent here on how we're going to deal with this if we get more than the percentage, which is where we began. So
Right.
I am still in favor of a lottery type system, and that's the end of my comments on that
He got wrong.
for now.
Okay, before you do that, I just wanted to say, Danielle, that I appreciate that I don't have Attorney Lawler's suggestions in front of me at this moment. I'm working on, and I don't think I need them to make this comment.
Okay, that's fine.
But thank you.
That's the passage.
I wanted to, I have
Right,
something
so-
underlined here.
And this, based on what I'm reading, it's kind of in line what I was gonna say, is that I think that the town, the first selectmen, are looking for, what they've been doing is broken. It didn't work and it failed our town miserably. And so they're looking for a new direction to avoid that happening. And I don't think,
I have something underlined here.
I just want,
right.
just give me a minute. Okay, so that being said, the town attorney does say that use of town property should be decided on first and foremost the basis of fairness to all of the parties. No one party should, no one party, because of what it stands for or how long it has been in existence, should have priorities over others. And so I think that goes toward the use of the property. I don't think that that goes toward which parcel. I think it's every single display has to be treated fairly in terms of whether or not it gets a spot in Bethel on town property.
Agreed. So,
Okay.
but that's what I'm saying, is that
Right.
if we get a higher percentage of display applications,
Mhm.
square footage than what we can accommodate, someone is going to need to decide which displays are not offered the opportunity that year. And this is saying priority is not given. I hear people will be upset. People are going to be upset no matter what they decide, and I think we just have to come to terms with that and take that into, there's nothing we can do about that.
Right.
So how do we decide, or how will they decide is really what I wanted to say. So again, I will say that I think that a lottery is the fairest way. That would be my suggestion, that would be my personal suggestion to the Board of Selectmen, is to employ a lottery system that takes into account the size of the displays, their needs from safety, I don't think we should put aesthetic into it, but from a safety and square footage consideration, good luck to them on that.
Is that a motion?
No, not yet. I don't think we're there yet. Does anybody else have a comment
I do.
about, yes, Fran?
Okay, something that Diana said, there is something called tyranny of the majority. And so, we don't, we have to recognize that we have two conflicting principles. We have majority rules, which is part of our system, but we also want to protect the minority. So we have those two conflicting principles. And we try to protect the minority in many cases. You can take your kid out of a sex education class. In years ago, when there was prayer in school, you could opt your kid out. So these are ways, you could, the minority's protected, but still, majority rules is a concept in our system of government. And I wanted to correct something that Attorney Lawler said, if I may.
You can make
correct
a-
it, you can offer
You
comment on it.
can comment on it.
Well, I think this is wrong here. To my knowledge, there is no court decision regarding what you ask. However, precedent should not matter, especially if it was incorrect to start out with. And I don't know where, where it was incorrect. It wasn't like other groups were vying to get on up until maybe, this year. And then we said, you can't come onto the square. If you have mistakenly allowed a use for several years, now where was the mistake? Why would you allow that use to take precedent over others in the future? Now, I asked a few people who were Jewish at the display, Tim, what was that, the
Dedication.
dedication. I said, how come you don't have a menorah up? And they said, we just haven't done it. It wasn't like they were banned from doing it. So I don't see where, and now they're working on getting, I guess, synagogues involved and getting a menorah made, but I don't see why he could say that it was wrong to begin with. The first I ever heard about a atheist display wanting to be erected on the square was this past season.
Holly, may I?
Yes.
I think you're misinterpreting his words. He's not saying.
I'm not misinterpreting
Yeah,
his
please
words.
don't
In fact, I
interrupt.
went over.
Thank you. He's not saying it was done incorrectly. He's saying if something is done incorrectly for a period of time, that's not a basis for continuing to do it incorrectly in the future.
Right, you can
He's
take it,
not
you can
saying-
take it the other way,
No.
yeah.
He's not saying this was done incorrectly. He's saying if, he's answering the question that we put there about grandfathering something in.
Well, if you wanna take it that way, that's good. If you wanna take it that way, I mean, you
That's
can
what
take it
he's
you
saying.
can take it two different ways.
Well, listen, it's up for interpretation. He's not here to
Interpretation.
tell us what he meant by that. It was offered illustratively, but for him as to give us an example as to why maybe precedent doesn't work. I don't know if Attorney Lawler were sitting here, if I asked him, in the case of,
I actually went to see him, couldn't get in though.
You're smart.
so I wonder what his comment would be. I wonder if he would have a different comment, if he meant precedent doesn't work because
I wanted to
just
get
because
clarification.
something is there, it gets to stay there, because I think he was using the example, what if it
Right.
was illegally there to begin with? And
Right.
we're not talking
So that's
about,
good to know that it wasn't,
that
that
is-
there was no mistakes to begin. That's
He
good to
didn't
know.
say that either, Fran.
No, but you just said it.
No, I didn't.
no, okay, no, we're not doing this, we're not doing this. Okay, Tim, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
So, my interpretation, and we all have one, I guess, I don't think precedent for the sake of precedent is ever a good idea.
Right.
Saying this is the way
Right.
we've always done it, so therefore this is the way we should do it.
Exactly.
I think every year we evaluate, does it make sense, and that's fine. But, a couple things. Matt, bringing it more locally, did ask us to take into consideration the town response, and with the understanding that there's a lot of people that aren't going to be happy, right? I do think the majority that appreciate the crush being there would be upset, or whatever you wanna call it, should it be moved.
That's right.
Especially if it's just being moved for the sake of randomness, right? And I do think we can be fair and include other displays which hopefully make other people feel more welcomed, and they may not be completely satisfied that they didn't get that spot, but fair, but hopefully it moved it a little closer to making them feel a little bit more included. And again, nobody's gonna walk away 100% thrilled, and that's, I recognize that, and I'm okay with that. But I do think with Matt taking, saying to take that into consideration, The second that crash moves to somewhere else, I do think there's gonna be a large group of people that are upset with it. And especially if it's just because of a lottery, because you know what, we picked the name out of a hat because somebody wanted to make sure they had a chance at that spot. I think it being on the square or being included is enough. And again, in my opinion, we're all gonna disagree, we're all ultimately gonna vote. And I also think precedent, you know, it also can be meant to take into consideration tradition and culture. Sometimes something is done just because traditionally that's how it's been done, and that traditions mean things to different people. And, you know, I do think that you have to give some consideration to that. And a lottery basically says, to hell with tradition, throw it out the window. It doesn't matter that people are gonna be upset. We're gonna do this totally randomly because, I don't know, because that's the way we wanna do it. And that's the problem I have with the lottery. I think we can be fair and inclusive, but at the same time still respect the culture and traditions that a lot of people have come to expect. And that's my 2 cents on that. I don't really have anything else to add on
Can I
this.
throw you a
Diana,
question, Tim?
no,
I'm sorry.
well, I'm sorry, Diana had something to add.
So, Tim, it's just coming, my memory, I'm sorry, let me see.
Take your time.
Because I don't want to make you feel put on the spot, but it has been in both of your comments the past 2 weeks where the talk of moving the crash is coming from a mean place or random. And as a psychologist, I am in the field of where the multicultural movement has done tremendous research in looking at starting to, as I used the phrase before, work on making a more equal playing field for all. And so I just think that by saying it's random minimizes what the value is in a lottery, in this whole discussion. And by saying it's mean, it makes it seem like it's a personal decision, like personal in the sense of like, oh, like a schoolyard stuff, like I don't like that, so I don't want it there anymore, when it really comes, at least for me, in a whole like subfield that's been like dedicated to making the world a better place. And if we're really having to talk about this being about being random or mean, I think we have to, before we can make any more decisions, like have some handouts on diversity and what inclusiveness really means, which is not just saying, okay, you can have a part of this, but we still stand
We
where
still
we
have a
are.
part also.
Right,
Yeah.
that defeats the whole idea of what inclusiveness is, which I think the public speakers stated very nicely.
Well, first of all, by randomness, I just meant that a lottery is random, that you're randomly assigning
No, you had
spots.
said, it
Whereas
just seems we want the decision to move the crash seems random.
No, by random, I'll clarify that I did mean that having the crush here, and then next year it's here, and next year it's there, just because we drew a name out of a hat. Basically, by going that direction and trying to be inclusive and doing that lottery, it's also saying we're gonna abolish this tradition that so many people find important because we wanna be accommodating.
But we're still
I'm
not
trying to do
talking
both.
about that
I'm
yet.
trying to be
Yeah.
inclusive, but at the same time respect the traditions that are important to a lot of people. There are a lot of people that I think are wrong that say, to hell, the majority should rule, and I think that's wrong.
No,
I do think we should include people.
We don't say that.
I don't like, there are people that do that, unfortunately. I think we should be including people, but at the same time, I do want the traditions that are in place and that are important to a lot of people to remain. And I'm looking for that balance, and I think maybe that's what we're all doing.
Danielle.
I still think we're talking about 2 different questions and we didn't resolve the first one. The first one is about how will we assign who gets to display? The
That's kind
second
of
one
what
that
we
you're
are,
talking
yeah.
to is where do they go? And we're not there yet.
Well,
You
no,
can
I
make a
think,
motion
Holly,
if you have
that,
suggestions, we can vote on it.
just as far as like running a meeting, if you're at a point where you feel like, if you're at a point where you feel like you're not staying on point and you're separating or you're combining things, my recommendation in running this meeting is then at that point in time, if you feel like you've discussed it, you make a motion. If that motion does not get seconded, then it doesn't move forward. If that motion gets voted down, then it can be amended. And it will help the flow of staying on track and answering the question that y'all are trying to ask. Because
you're making a motion pertaining to that. And then from that, you have your discussion. And then at that point, it can be amended if you're not able to come to,
All right,
Okay.
I'm ready to put a motion on the floor if I may, Holly.
Could I say something first?
Go ahead.
I'd like to mention something that one of our guests said last week. We are here for the town. You know, we have to consider the town. We're not here for us. And we're making this more complicated than it need be with diversity and all this multiculturalism, you know? So
We don't know what to say.
let's just move on and think of the town and not just who's here.
but with that said, anybody sitting here has the right to make a motion.
All right, so I would like to.
You don't
put a
have to ask for
Make the
permission.
motion.
Yes, I would like to put a motion on the floor.
Yes.
My motion is,
Somebody has a second. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, you have to give it to us.
I know you're waiting to second the
I
motion.
thought I
John.
already knew what it
so
was.
excited
I already
to
knew what it
second
was.
Let me get it out first before you jump.
So enthusiastic.
I'm waiting
I
to
know.
hear it.
I know. So I would like to put a motion on the floor that states that should the number, no, not the number, that should the square footage of the completed applications that the town receives exceed the square footage of available property for displays, that the town will employ a lottery system to determine which applicants will be offered a space to display. Was that convoluted enough?
I think we understand it.
All right, that's
I
my
have-
motion.
Of course, it went on, I only got the
Yeah.
first
Was
read.
that too fast,
So-
Dion?
No, I think I've got the gist of it, and I'll watch the video.
And you'll watch the video.
I try to use as
Okay,
many
now
words.
now at this point, is somebody gonna second that? Okay, all right. Now, you can discuss it, and if you need to discuss it, and then it can be voted on.
It's way too hypothetical.
Okay, and that's your opinion,
Well,
but it
let's,
will have to be voted on.
All right.
Okay,
Let me, can I,
yes.
as
go
like
ahead.
right ahead.
Joe Schmo,
Yes.
regular Bethel
Oh, I thought you were
kind of person. So I appreciate the crush, I identify with it. If it were to move from year to year, I would go to see it. I understand where you're coming from, I respect it. But I just don't see the problem with the lottery. I think that it affords fairness to everyone.
Okay. I don't want to monopolize, so I'm looking. Aaron, you don't say very much. Do you have, can you add to this discussion? Not at the moment? Okay. What about Robin? Anything to add?
I don't have a problem with the lottery if it got to that point. Because initially, if, going back to the creche, it has size requirements, it has very specific requirements. And if that application is put in, and, you know, it's very specific, it can't just go anyplace.
Right.
And you don't have any other conflicting applications for the same size unit, asking for the same specifications. Then, you know, the lottery would have to happen, but that's where the town, or the Parks and Rec Department will decide, okay, well, this person had their application in, these are their specs, and we have a space for it. And we have 3 more applicants, and this is their size, and this is their place, and, you know. If we got tons and tons more, then I don't see a problem with the lottery.
I would like to clarify, so what the motion is, as I understand it, is if we had more than are going to fit, and somebody's going to be excluded, that it is gonna be just randomly determined by lottery, which would mean that there is a reasonable or a possible chance that the creche would just not go up at all.
Right.
If you adopt, if voting in favor of this is voting for a possibility that on a given year, should there be too many applications that come in, or potentially not even that many applications, but somebody just applies to put enough large things that to monopolize more than a third of the space, then it would go to total random lottery and potentially eliminate the possibility of the creche being up at all that year.
We
That
get
is
the
what
short
the-
straw.
Voting in favor of this is voting for the possibility
Yeah.
that the creche may not be up.
Exactly.
Right.
And I'm not voting right now, but my taking into consideration the town response, that's something that I think would make a large number of people, even those that don't,
Ditto.
that are not, that maybe are indifferent, to see that, we're gonna allow multiple other things and not the creche on a
Yeah.
given year by chance, by lottery, by whatever, is my problem with the lottery system.
Yeah.
I think it's too simple. It completely whitewashes all culture and tradition in exchange for this. Now, again, this is only gonna happen if we get so many applicants. I do think at that point, somebody that wants to see the creche not there is almost tempted to put in, encourage as many applications as possible be put in
Yeah.
to drive it into a lottery. And to do that every year until it doesn't happen. And people will do that. And that's a problem I have with a random policy that completely excludes, call it precedent, call it culture, call it tradition,
Yeah.
call it majority, call it whatever you wanna call it. I have an issue with that, and that's just
Me
my.
too.
I think that's-
Ditto.
Danielle?
Yes, so I hear what you're saying, Tim, and I respect your passion for having your display up. I'd like to speak to the other side to the equation. Having a policy, I know because you keep saying it, and Diana mentioned this a moment ago, that you feel like this is a vindictive attack on the creche, and that you feel like people are out to move it off. And I will not try to remove those feelings from your heart, because you are entitled to your thoughts and your feelings and your interpretation, so I'm not going to try. I would like to present the other side to it. If there is a policy in place that shows that equal consideration will be given to anyone in our community wishing to put up a display, I think it has the opposite effect to what you are saying. And when I listened to the speaker who came in to speak tonight, he said, and I identify with a lot of what he said, not everything, but a lot of it, that it hasn't seemed inclusive ever in his experience here. It hasn't seemed inclusive in my experience ever. And if there's a policy that shows that not only is it inclusive, but we will protect the rights of all, that actually, I think, is enough for a lot of people who will just feel like, okay, it is fair, it is equitable, and I don't need to make a point because the policy exists.
Can I say something with respect, and the speaker isn't here, and I'm sorry he's not here, because, I would want him to hear these comments, but my opinion of this, I agreed with a lot of what the speaker said, but what I didn't agree with, and what I don't agree with, Danielle, is characterizing, he said that up until, that it hasn't been inclusive. The fact
Yeah.
that the creche was there, he was insulted by it,
Yeah.
and he felt alienated.
Yeah.
He said, I don't wanna be dramatic,
His
but
mouth opened.
my mouth just dropped that there was a creche on the property.
My God.
That doesn't mean that the policy was exclusive.
That's
No,
right.
that's
Nobody
Nobody
else
else
put
tried.
anything
Right.
up.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
so
Nothing
I
was
do take,
intentional.
I'm making a
Oh, I'm
comment.
sorry.
I'm sorry. But I took that, I thought, you know what? I get that if there might be a display that I find that I go, what? And, but that doesn't mean that I'm looking at the town like, the heck,
I'm moving.
well, and I didn't hear him say he was gonna move, but,
Did happen. Nor
but-
did I, and when I
Right.
saw it, I had a very similar response. It
Right.
was, why is that on town property?
Right.
That looks to me,
Uh-huh.
right or wrong, I'm telling you what I
What-
felt
right.
when I moved here, my first winter when it went up.
Right.
I felt excluded, like the town was indeed endorsing that it was a problem. Now, I also know that's problematic because there was no policy in place in order to make sure that other people had the right, and I didn't pull a display together. I did support the display that went up
Right.
this past year. I was excited and enthusiastic to do so because I felt like it was long overdue for somebody to take the reins, and while I wasn't prepared to do it myself, I was enthusiastic to support somebody else in
And
doing
I
it.
think that's great.
But I'm saying that having a policy in place that says, yes, we actually as a town do not endorse one thing. We actually as a town are going to have a policy in place that demands that everyone who wants to have a voice has the opportunity to potentially have a voice.
Yeah.
That sits so much better with me, and I think with a larger percentage of the population than people realize.
I agree with you. And by the way, I just want to clarify the fact that this is going to be located, whether it's the creche, the menorah, the banner, the atheist banner, it's not, the town is not endorsing anything.
I understand, I'm
Never
telling you
has.
how
So,
it felt to
Yeah.
me.
No, I understand, but we have to understand that by allowing the creche to continue, or allowing a menorah to be put out, or allowing the atheist banner to be
Right.
displayed on town property, is not the town of Bethel endorsing atheism, or Catholicism, or Christianity, or
If
Judaism.
everybody has the
Right.
opportunity, if
As long as
one
they
has
have the
precedent,
opportunity,
then
right.
that's different, right? Robin has her.
Yes, Robin.
Just my 2 cents, is I don't think, having a policy, I think, is critical, because it was very wishy-washy.
Yes.
But make no mistake, I don't believe the town was denying anyone with a valid cause coming forward.
Right, right.
What happened last year, people, you may have felt that way, and I respect that. But if you had presented something to the town
Yep.
in a completed fashion with the blueprints, the specs, whatever, the paid insurance binder, bing, bang, boom, boom, do you really honestly think it would have been denied?
No, and I said that.
Well,
Well,
once the
that's-
application was completed to satisfaction, it was then approved. So,
yeah,
I mean,
right.
so that,
But to have a policy that
I know.
states
The motion was filed,
this
we
is
still need to
fine,
discuss
but
it.
you're also
Yeah.
insinuating that since there was no policy.
That's not
Okay,
what I am
so-
implying.
okay,
If
so.
you had done it 2
Okay,
years
no. What, I want us to get back on topic, though. Let's stay on topic, you know? Okay, go ahead, you have a question?
No one seconded my motion.
No,
I know Deanna
no,
said.
no,
Yes,
Aaron
you
did.
did.
Aaron,
Oh, that's how-
Yes.
Aaron
It's
did
up for
second.
discussion.
It was up for
Should
discussion.
only be discussing
So
the
when you're
motion.
ready, so when
And
discussion
so-
is over,
Thank you.
then we need
Sorry.
to take
Right,
that.
and so and I want to move it to a vote, but I want everybody to get an opportunity to, just very briefly, and I think a lot of people have, I'm gonna put out there that I'm against a lottery, and for a lot of the reasons, Tim, that you had articulated already, I believe that tradition and culturally and symbolically, I don't look at the creche as a Christian symbol so much as a winter festival symbol. So I don't see it as, so I'd like to see it year after year after year. And I do believe, and it has very specific requirements, power, size, how it can get onto the property, that I think that the lottery would end up knocking the creche out. And so I think that, and I also say, I don't think we're gonna get enough to even need a lottery, but that being said, I don't like the idea of randomness. I like the idea of having a policy, what's acceptable, and letting the selectmen put it wherever. And you know what? If they get too many, they might have to open up more property,
I think there would have to be further discussion, that's my opinion.
Yeah,
And I do agree there could be unintended consequences
yeah.
of it, and it may not be.
I don't wanna see anybody knocked out.
Right.
See, that's the thing. But I see through a lottery, and I'll explain why. It's not because I favor the creche. I just see a situation where with a lottery,
Chance.
the creche if the creche can't go anywhere else, okay? So in a lottery situation, there's a chance that it's gonna get knocked out, and there might be banners and signs and smaller things that are put on and then the creche is out. Just like if there were a big display, I don't wanna keep using the atheist banner. I mean, there could be other things, a huge menorah, okay? I'd like to see a menorah,
Yeah,
You know?
it's in the works.
Working on it.
and you're working on it, and I think that's great. So I'd really like to find a policy that isn't as random and that assures that, everybody gets an opportunity, including, hey, listen, you exceed the size for our percentage thing. So would you consider making it smaller, before you build it, because you have, the creche is built. See, that's the issue. The creche is built, it's not gonna change every year. So somebody new coming in, hey, I have an idea, I wanna build a menorah. Hey, would you guys consider reducing the size, changing it a little bit so that we can get you on property? And I would rather see that kind of a policy.
Try to be as accommodative as you can.
Yes, Danielle had her hand up first.
So that, putting restriction, I understand what the heart behind what you're trying to say
Yeah.
is, however, what I also hear there that you're not intending, but that comes across unintentionally, is you are putting restrictions on what other people can put up in order to accommodate the creche, and that's
Yes.
problematic to me. But what I wanted to say was, perhaps I could offer a suggestion to amend my former motion that would say anyone who is knocked off of the property, that's not how I would say it, but anyone who doesn't get an approved application due to the lottery would have a priority for the next year. Because we're really talking about 1 year. We're not saying your display can never be there.
Like voted off the
By
island?
default, that would mean that the following year, the rest would have less of a chance. of
Okay,
being
before discussion continues, that would have to be seconded.
Oh,
I'll second.
That's amending the original.
Yeah, she amended it.
Okay.
Before voting, we'll do the state.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's so, now we have this new wrinkle, and in response to the new motion that's been seconded, Danielle, I would offer that if, again, it goes back to, I don't wanna say precedent, tradition, it goes back to, you're filing, it's kind of like when you wanna build a house, and you come to the building department to get a permit, okay, and you have your plans, you had your architect draw up plans, and you go, and the building department says, I'm sorry, but that garage is too big, it's too close to the boundary line, or too close to the road, you're gonna need to change that if you wanna put it on this piece of property. So that's what I'm equating my, hey, listen, we'd like to have you, Mr. Menorah, but you're too big, you haven't been built yet. So can you change it? I don't think that's asking the minority to change. That's asking, you don't have something, so let's try and let's include everybody instead of knocking you off the island. Let's try and all get along. That's
I
my
hear what you're
comment.
saying. I
You know,
disagree.
I understand.
respectfully disagree,
I
but
get
I
it.
hear what you're saying.
Yes, Fran.
finally. I'm hearing too many I and me and we. Think about the people out there. Think about the people out there. We are representing them. Point two, the meetings that were held in December, if I'm not mistaken, you wanted representation. You said you were left out, you wanted to be on the square, right? So now we're saying, yeah, welcome to the club, but we don't wanna move the creche for the reasons already cited. And now you changed your demand. Now you want the creche to be off and you want, but
Okay,
before it was
so-
like, you just wanted a part of the real estate.
I
We're
never
offering.
said that, Fran.
All right,
Please
first
stop
of all,
saying
Yes,
that.
we did.
Okay,
we did.
so first of all, I didn't hear that, and second of all, it's off point. It's off point because we have a motion that we're supposed to be
That's what we're
discussing.
discussing.
We're discussing whether or not,
That's
the
not relevant?
people,
That's not relevant to the discussion?
to whether or not,
What I may have said in the past is not relevant to the motion on the table.
the motion on the
Whether or not it's
table is,
correct or incorrect.
if a lottery results in
Okay.
some people getting
All right.
knocked off,
Is the first thing I said, is that relevant?
Yes.
Think about the people out there.
yes.
And also, if I may talk about, I mentioned what Tim said, it wasn't that it was vindictive, it was that chance, it was just by chance, maybe the creche would not be, isn't that what you meant?
I
That
don't
the
like
cre-
the randomness of it. I
Yeah,
don't
the
like
randomness of
I don't like the
chance.
elimination
It wasn't
of
that anything to do
tradition.
with vindictiveness,
I think-
so I just wanted
Okay.
to correct that,
Right.
because,
Mary.
So just kind of going back to what Danielle said, I understand where Tim is coming from, because I know that him and his group has put a lot of work into the creche, and it means so much to so many people in this town, myself included.
Right.
But, I mean, what if there's a possibility that nobody wants to apply because they feel like, okay, it is really random. I mean, maybe nobody else applies for anything. Maybe it's just the creche and the menorah that Tim is working on. Maybe
Awesome.
it's the banner. This is also,
Speculative.
yeah,
I know.
Who
we don't really
knows?
know.
We're gonna need to vote on this
Yeah.
motion first, but
All right.
another possible solution would be that we just leave it up to the selectmen, to cross that bridge if it should ever happen.
And Parks and Recreation.
If I was Matt, I would be like, no.
No, I wanna
This
Right,
is
yeah.
only if it ever happens,
Right.
though,
This
like,
is an
advisory.
it's one of those things that.
Well, I think that's, to be honest, that's where they need it the most.
And that's
is
why he gave
when
us this
it-
charge,
yeah.
is to offer recommendations.
That's when they need it the most. They don't need it if only 2 applications.
Right, of course.
They need it when we got, we're both. All right, so I think, is there any other discussion about the motion that's, Dion, did you take down the motion?
Yes.
Could you read it again?
So should the square footage of the application exceed, the space that is available,
But could you start from the beginning?
should the square footage of the application exceed the available space, or the available property that the town has available, then a lottery will go into place to be decided. That was amended, and then it was added, anyone that does not get approval due to the lottery would be first on the list for next year.
Could you just, it's applications, I'm sorry to be nitpicky, but I don't want it to sound like application.
The combined
Thank you so much.
square footage of the applications is what.
Those are my abbreviations.
But you understand why I wanna make sure.
No,
you
I
get
get
it.
it.
Did you mean combined
Question
square
with
footage of
that.
all the applications, right?
I have a
Robin,
question.
yes.
If that happened, in theory, in the following year, by default, you have 30 applications again, it automatically goes to a lottery. So how
Again.
can you say that the person who got bumped last year has priority when you've already, it's.
I'm sorry, Robin, I'm not following you, can you?
Okay.
I'm not following it either.
So say Tim's crush got bumped,
Yes,
and if he was given priority for next year,
yes,
next year, there's 30 applicants.
right. Vying for the other space because.
Any space,
Right, because
30
the crush
applicants.
got bumped, so they get
because
first.
he got bumped because there were 30 applicants this year,
Right,
and it went to lottery.
right,
He got bumped.
right,
He and, maybe 15, 17 other people got bumped.
right.
Right, that's the issue.
Right.
So,
The whole thing is that
the
it's-
next year, how can you tell those people who got bumped, they automatically get it if you still have 30 applicants coming in that you've already said, well, if you have more applicants than
And they-
what it allows, it goes to lottery.
I think the answer is that those 15 people that got bumped, or 15 displays rather, that got bumped, year one, can we do that way to make
Yeah,
it clear?
yeah.
They would get priority placements for year two.
But if they're
And
not
then
15
if there's,
spots.
and then if there's 15 people that were on last year, year one, who aren't gonna make it because the 15 that got bumped year one are now gonna be on for year two, then
It could be 15
I think
this
Anybody
year.
have a
You've
headache?
got
Wait,
every
wait,
other
wait,
year.
hold on.
I still think that's
I think
probably
that the
generous,
issue-
I don't think that's gonna
No,
happen.
I think
But-
I
that
don't think so
Robin's
either.
question is though, what if 15 get bumped and we don't have 15 available spaces the next year?
Maybe you need
So
an
that's,
alternate
isn't that the
lottery.
question?
It's
That if
and it
15
just-
get bumped,
And then you have an overage
right,
of people the following year, it automatically by default, because of the policy, will go into.
That's right.
we should be so fortunate to have this meeting.
I
Well,
know, I know.
But I hear what
We're
you're saying.
talking
But that's why I
hypothetically.
don't think it works. That's why I don't think the
No,
lottery
it's not gonna work.
works.
But I think we
But I think, listen, I think let's vote on it, but it's, time is starting to run.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
One of our guests left.
yeah.
He's had it.
So, no, I mean, it's getting late.
It's getting late.
It's
and
been long.
It's getting intricate.
And so, I'm suggesting, I was hoping we'd wrap up tonight. That's what my hope
Oh.
was. But we're not even close. So,
Close.
I think we are close, actually. This is a pretty big point.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
no, I mean,
She's voting on the lottery or not.
yes.
yeah, this is
correct.
voting on lottery or not. All right, so, and then, well, let's see what the result of the lottery is. So I'm gonna call it to a vote. So all in favor of a lottery system, in place for those displays that,
You can just say all in favor of the amendment on the table since Tiana read it.
No, just,
yeah, because I really can't,
All in favor of the amended motion?
It's so complicated, we can't even say it.
I didn't write
That
it down.
happens a lot
It's
in
not because it's
Very wordy.
complicated. Okay, so all in favor of the amended motion on the table? All opposed? Any abstentions? No, I saw no abstentions. So now we have a tie.
Okay, now, a tie is a failed vote.
Yep.
So what has to happen at that point is either y'all have to come to some type of agreement, or you have to decide to, you know, move it to the Board of Select, whatever it is, but a tie is a failed vote.
I'd like to file a motion.
Yep.
I'd like to file a motion to give consideration to give first spot to pre-existing displays that have been in place in previous years, and to assign the remaining spots by lottery should they applications exceed the number of remaining spots.
I second it.
Okay,
All right,
just give me 1
discussion.
second.
Sure.
Remaining spots.
So that is the,
Hold on for a second. Do you need me to clarify, Dan? Okay.
Can you just say it again?
So I would like priority to be given first in the selection process, priority to first be given to
Pre-existing
displays that have
displays.
pre-existed, and then remaining
spots
places to be given
to
by,
applications. By lottery.
well, it would be given by town selection, and then, but if they exceed to the last point, then they would have to be done by lottery.
Can I ask a question to clarify that?
Yes,
How do you,
yes.
how do you define pre-existing?
So I would say the previous year, I
Yeah.
think that's fair. I think if somebody vacates a spot, then that spot is available, and then if they choose the following year to not do it, the year after, then they are a new applicant again. I think that's reasonable to
Yeah.
assume.
So under that motion, every year, the creche and the atheist banner would have priority over.
This year,
If they continue.
this
to
year,
If they
so long
continue
as
to
they
do it.
continue. And, you know, and that's into my motion, but just to open the discussion on this before voting, my thought process, again, is respecting culture and tradition, which we've
And
discussed.
safety,
Safety, I'm gonna leave that off the table, I think we've clarified that, but
you mentioned it.
trying to give some respect to the tradition, trying to give some practicality to this process, to not have it all moving around, trying to make it just a little bit less random, but at the same time, still making sure that there's spots available. And then in the event that we get an overwhelming amount of applications and there's no other way to pick, only then does a lottery come in for the new applicants. And that's my thinking on the motion. If anybody else has
Yeah,
discussion,
that's
I'll
excellent.
defer to you to make.
I think I've probably already made my thoughts on it clear, so.
All right,
And I
let's
think
vote
that's
on
fair.
it.
Thank
I
you.
second it.
Who, you seconded it?
Yep.
Is there any, does anybody else have any comments about this?
I like that. It's,
Yeah. Something.
It's a blend.
He's back. We thought we scared
We
you.
thought
Yeah,
we
we
Oh,
scared
no,
you.
I just had to use the restroom, and I
Yeah.
got locked up.
Well, because.
We thought we bored you to death.
It
Oh,
does
very
secure
good.
your culture, if that's what you want to take place. I mean, Tim, you could step out tomorrow and get hit by a bus, and nobody could pick up the,
Oh, I have a secession plan.
Of course
but,
you do.
but that would, you know, sometimes traditions, they cease to exist, they discontinue. However, year by year, so going forward, this year, you've got 2 applicants that have already been established, already been approved for the property. And they have, if they get their application, their binder, whatever the application is for Parks and Rec, they have that in by a certain date. They do get preference. And then based off the remaining areas, that would go forth again to Park and Rec, depending on what is available for the application size and what is available in the property sizes. And if it becomes too much, then those people can go into the lottery system.
Okay, I think that is a great, can I say something?
Yes, this is discussion time, Fran. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, no, I said yes,
Oh,
it's discussion
thank you.
time, Fran.
If you don't wanna hear safety, let's mention logistics, that it's heavy, that it's on a truck, or, you know, it's not just tradition and history, it's logistics, moving something that's heavy and big, and, you know, we're not moving a dollhouse. So, I think that we have to mention that, and I second your motion. Let's vote.
No,
Can I
and-
just,
Oh,
yeah.
Can I just say, the only thing with your motion, you said the first spots go to the pre-existing displays and the remaining spots would then, you might wanna think about, also putting in there that that, the pre-existing displays that follow the application process.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
assumed.
And that's,
that-
So if you wanna amend that,
I will amend my previous motion to include complete applications as per the town guidelines.
So we didn't screw things up.
and
Okay.
anybody
Anybody
wanna
second my
second that?
amendment?
Second it.
Okay.
Thank you, Deanne.
I'd like to hear from, I personally, in making a decision, I'd like to hear from like Diana or Danielle about what you think about that.
About,
The motion.
About the motion, about the fact, like, it just so happens that those are the only two groups that had a display out last year. So how do you feel about Tim's motion?
so you're asking what my vote is?
No,
No, what do you-
no,
what's
just,
your
I
opinion?
just
No,
want
I know,
to,
but I know, okay, so, I mean,
Yeah.
I disagree.
okay,
If you'd like me to go into, and I feel like I've made many points of
Yeah.
why I disagree, and it has, it being very separate from my belief system, and it being very much about, my lens and how I would like things to be. And so to, because I know there was some
Again, the people.
sensitivity,
Let her speak.
but I'm not coming from the, I am a majority member, I'm a white female, like I am
Right.
a part of the majority culture, and I look at things differently than then we all look at things differently, but on this particular issue, I'm not in favor of doing what everyone else wants because that's what's been done. And so, but we're just getting, I'm sorry, I'm responding to
no,
the-
because I was
I'm
looking
responding to
for,
what's going on behind you, and so I'm a
Oh.
little distracted.
I'm not saying anything.
I'm
But
sorry.
the facial gesture, I understand.
Well, I mean, you're all
what
making faces over there too. I just pointed to the people
okay, no,
saying
no, no, no,
hi.
okay, stop,
It was just, it was distracting, so I'm getting off
I'm just sitting
topic.
here, I'm not doing anything,
no, no,
you know,
okay,
you're making faces too
Yeah.
and laughing. I've noticed that.
yes,
Yeah,
dear.
Oh, no, please,
Oh, no, no, no.
please, please,
No,
please.
Diane, no, I
I
did get
just
you,
made, like,
and I just wanted to, in my response, the reason why I called you out, so to speak, okay, was because I'm trying, I wanna understand how Tim's motion doesn't at least move us closer
Yeah.
to inclusivity. That's what I'm looking for, because it's, in my mind, sometimes it's baby steps, but baby steps lead to bigger steps and to better things, and so that's what it is.
I understand, and from my perspective, from, you know, how I see things, it just perpetuates the issue of majority rules. It's not what inclusivity really means, which is everyone gets a fair shot.
Well,
And this isn't
yeah.
fair, or like last time, it's not like
Right,
it's
right.
the pizza, it's people's identity.
But
And that's
it's,
very important.
but
to
in
me.
terms of inclusivity, you can't get any more inclusive than having an atheist display and a Christian,
Yeah,
good
of
Christianity.
course you
I mean, no, I mean, in terms of,
Side by side.
like, in terms of like moving from, you know, exclusiveness to wanting to include everybody, okay? By saying, okay, here are the polar extremes and it's open to everybody.
Yeah.
It's open, and if the number exceeds, then we do a lottery.
I'd like to offer, it's a compromise.
It's
Yeah,
a
it's a
compromise,
compromise.
is
Really
what,
it is.
and I
Where-
think sometimes
Compromise.
compromises can be built on and move forward, because let's face it, the vote is split. So both sides are gonna have to, we're gonna have to compromise to come to some side, and maybe we don't do this tonight.
Or we
Maybe
don't
we need to
compromise
think,
and we send it to the first selectman for them to figure, or for the, excuse me, the board of selectmen, for them to determine, which is another possibility.
You would have to vote.
which is, yeah, okay, so, yes, Aaron.
I mean, if I might, I mean, this suggestion encounters the same issue we just sort of denied the prior vote for, in that, I mean, if you get to a certain threshold where you're saying, let's say 15 people apply, now let's say 3 or 4 people have already become the defined preferred people that get their display, the other 11 are out by default every year, so that doesn't really promote a sort of.
But are they being treated preferred because of the group that they symbolize, or are they being preferred because of other things? See, I think there's a difference.
Well, that's another
you know,
question to be
that's
asked,
a
right?
different
Because
question.
in this case, we're talking about Tim being responsible for the creche and a menorah.
not responsible for.
Well,
Don't
well,
give me any
you
more,
said
please.
business, you said
Crash,
business.
just the crash.
One thing at a
So
time.
I think, you have to consider whether you're talking about the display or the individuals behind it. But at the end of the day, you still get, if you get to a point where you say, okay, we have our square foot threshold, and we, let's say, for argument's sake, that's 5 people over the course of a year or two, anyone else that comes in after that is out.
We would hopefully try to find more locations should that happen. And
It-
that's
wait,
it.
yeah,
And
listen, we
we're-
don't-
we're-
yeah.
I can't think of a perfect solution.
We don't
to
live in
that.
utopia, and this is why
Yeah.
it's gonna be difficult,
Sometimes
because
you run out
it's
of
not
space.
perfect, and we're gonna have issues and stuff.
So I understand
Yes.
value of compromise,
Yes.
but not when it goes absolutely against the foundations of why you are making your case to begin with. And that is my issue, and I think that's what Diana is saying, so I can't compromise on that point because it fundamentally goes against exactly my purpose for wanting to be on this committee. And I would like to just read it out
Yes,
loud.
yes, please.
This is from Marty. Okay, hang on, I'm gonna find exactly the right place to start.
From
Use of
Attorney
town-
Waller,
Correct, thank you.
thank you.
Use of town property should be decided on first and foremost the basis of fairness to all of the parties. No one party, because of what it stands for or how long it has been in existence, should have priorities over others. Hang on, I wanna see if the rest is worth reading.
Okay, mark that also.
So, what I hear there is fairness to all and no priority for previous placements. I hear what you're saying and saying, well, but the atheists can have priority too. I don't want it.
Okay.
I
got
want
it.
fairness for
I hear
all.
it.
Once
If
you-
mine
once-
gets
once the
bumped,
motion
mine,
that just-
that one that
Right, no, I
represents
get
me
it,
gets
yeah.
bumped,
Yeah.
so be it.
Arguing for the original motion as the only option.
Yeah, that's not a
Correct.
compromise.
I mean, it's.
Correct, it's not a compromise
Okay.
because it
fair.
fundamentally goes against
Mm-hmm.
what I believe, right?
And it's understandable. I
It
mean,
is.
the initial, very first vote was to not have it on the public square at all, so, and then position is understood, so, but,
You understand my reason for voting against having it there at all, I hope, because I think I've
Uh,
been
yeah,
expressing that
no,
clearly
from
throughout.
previous discussion, I think I'm comfortable with that.
I just wanna make sure that that hits the record and that it wasn't, because
No, I understand.
truly,
I know.
in collegiality with you, Tim, I do hear you repeatedly making comments that indicate to me, as we talked about before, so I wanna make sure that you truly hear what I'm saying. Yes, are we good?
I believe so.
Okay, we can talk about it anytime.
All right. So, any other, since I'm gonna put it to a vote.
Yeah, good.
All right, so all in favor of Tim's amended motion?
Go ahead.
Yeah, read it, please.
So approval of, or consideration of approval for the first spots to go to pre-existing displays that have followed the application process, with the remaining spots, to be offered to new applications, okay, I'm sorry, remaining spots to be,
Allocated, right?
let me start over, guys, I'm sorry,
Take your
I'm cross-eyed.
It's like,
Consideration of approval that the first spots will go to pre-existing displays who follow the application process, with remaining spots going to new applications that have been that have gone through the town selection and then will go to lottery. Is that correct?
correct,
I think so.
so I understand.
So, all in favor of the amended motion?
Say aye.
Say-
Raise your hand,
say-
all right?
Raise your hand if you
Okay.
say aye. Aye.
Okay, we have an-
All opposed? I don't even have to look.
I abstain.
And one abstention. So the motion
Who's
passes.
the
It
abstention?
passes.
Mary?
Oh.
Okay,
A motion to adjourn.
yes,
Right,
seconded.
okay,
And
good.
I'd like to we need to set a meeting
I'm sorry,
because.
you're right, I do think you
Oh,
said it.
wait,
Yeah.
guys, we've got to set more regular meetings.
Yes.
So we are so close.
No.
Holly,
You want us,
Done.
just look and think for a moment, rather than coming back together
okay,
again.
let me look.
Do we really need to address physical and size restrictions?
No,
Okay, and do we need to address how locations will be
No.
assigned?
we're leaving it to
No,
the
that's
town.
Time frame
Parks
would be
and
the
Rec-
only
Rec-
question that would be
recreation.
left.
The allowable timeframe.
Which again,
Why can't we leave that to the
Parks
town?
and Recreation,
has-
they're
has
I
an
will-
they're
application.
I will
competent
say
people. They
as-
run the day camp.
as being familiar with the application, I will say that the application does currently have a requested time frame that is approved based on availability and other factors. There is a policy on the application, which is right on the Parks and Rec site, if anybody wants to take a look at it. There's an application for outdoor use and for indoor gyms and whatnot. It's the outdoor use one, obviously. That does address a lot of these. Obviously, it doesn't restrict them as much as it just says, what do you want, and then they consider it. I don't know if the selectman needs advice on that from us, or if they're comfortable with it.
I was
think Parks
really,
and
when I
Rec-
wrote this, just trying to cover all the
I think
bases.
it-
So-
But not necessarily that we
But
have
Parks
to.
and Rec could address that.
So maybe what we can do is we can offer our draft recommendation to Mr. Knickerbocker and ask if he would like any further clarification, you know. Why don't we
We
do
could
that?
schedule a
Great,
meeting
we're
if
done.
there's
Okay, and then we
questions.
would schedule a special meeting.
A special
If he has
meeting to do
questions
that.
or what-
Okay, so who wants to adjourn?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? No? Thank you very much. Can I just say for the record, I really appreciate everybody's input. I appreciate everybody here. I appreciate, Danielle, you saying, let's